Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. You said you were curious about listeners' reason, EBG, local wildlife, a biology course, etc. Well, let's jump right into the fascinating world of ecosystems.
And get ready for some surprises because ecosystems are way more complex than just a bunch of plants and animals hanging out.
Right. It's like we all know ecosystems are important, but how often do we actually stop and think about what's going on beneath the surface?
It's easy to forget how interconnected everything is. It's not just about the animals we see. It's the plants, the soil, even the weather. They're all players in this incredible, intricate web of life.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is an ecosystem? I mean, I have a vague picture in my head, but
Sure. In the simplest terms, an ecosystem is a community of living organisms like plants and animals interacting with each other and their physical environment.
okay, that makes sense, but it still seems kind of broad. Like, is my backyard an ecosystem? Absolutely.
Ah.
Even a small patch of grass can be considered an ecosystem. It's got its own little community of plants, insects, maybe even some earthworms under the surface, all doing their thing, all interconnected.
Wow, I never thought of my backyard like that. So how do these ecosystems actually work? What makes them tick?
Well, at the heart of every ecosystem, you have two main processes, the flow of energy and the cycling of matter. Think of energy as the fuel that keeps the whole system running.
And where does that fuel come from? I'm guessing it's not like there's a gas station for ecosystems?
Nope, no gas stations here. The ultimate source of energy for almost all ecosystems on Earth is the sun.
Ah, the sun, our friendly neighborhood star. But how does that solar energy actually get into the ecosystem?
That's where those amazing organisms we call producers come, in your plants, your algae. They're like the solar panels of the ecosystem. They capture that sunlight energy and, through the magic of photosynthesis, convert it into usable energy in the form of sugars.
So plants are like the chefs of the ecosystem, whipping up a delicious meal using sunlight as their secret ingredient.
Exactly. And just like any good chef, they don't just eat all the food themselves. They provide the energy that supports the entire ecosystem.
Which is where the consumers come in. That's us, right? We can't resist a good meal, especially one that's been prepped by those solar-powered chefs.
You got it. We eat plants, we eat animals that eat plants. We're all part of this intricate food chain, or more accurately, a food web.
Food web, so it's not just a straight line from plant to plate.
Not at all. It's more like a tangled web of who eats who, with energy flowing through all these different pathways.
Okay, now my head is starting to spin a little bit. So we've got energy flowing from the sun to the plants, to the herbivores munching on those plants, and then to the carnivores who are, well, munching on the herbivores. It's like a cosmic buffet line out there.
And just like any good buffet, there's a limited amount of food, or in this case energy, to go around.
So how does that work? Do we all get an equal share of the sun's energy?
That's where things get really interesting. There's this concept called the 10% rule, which basically says that only about 10% of the energy from one level of the food chain makes it to the next. So if a plant captures 100 units of energy from the sun,
Only 10 units of energy go to the herbivore that eats it. That's not very efficient, is it?
it might seem inefficient, but it's this inefficiency that actually shapes the structure of ecosystems. It's why we see way more plants than herbivores, and even fewer top predators like lions or eagles.
So that big, juicy burger I had for lunch, that represents a whole lot of energy moving through the ecosystem, starting from the sun to the plants to the cow, and finally ending up on my plate.
It's a wild thought, isn't it? Every time we eat, we're essentially tapping into this intricate flow of energy that started millions of miles away with our very own sun.
Who knew lunchtime could be such a profound ecological event? Okay, so we've got this energy flowing through ecosystems like some kind of invisible river. But what about the actual stuff that makes up these ecosystems? The physical building blocks.
Ah, you're talking about matter. And you're right, it's not just about the energy. It's about the physical materials that cycle through ecosystems.
So we're talking about atoms and molecules, like the stuff we learned about in chemistry class.
Exactly. We're talking about elements like carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. Those are the real VIPs of the natural world.
Okay, those names ring a bell, but remind me, why are they so important again?
Well, these elements are the building blocks of life. Carbon, that's the backbone of all organic molecules, from the DNA in our cells to the wood in that tree outside your window. Nitrogen is essential for building proteins, which are like the workhorses of our bodies. And phosphorus, well, that's a key ingredient in our DNA and ATP, which is like the energy currency of our cells.
Wow, it sounds like we literally wouldn't exist without these elements.
Exactly. They're constantly cycling through ecosystems, from the air and soil to living organisms and back again. It's like this incredible, intricate dance, and it's happening all around us.
So it's not like these elements just magically appear when we need them?
Not at all. They're constantly being recycled and repurposed. And the really cool part is that we're actively participating in these cycles, even with something as simple as breathing.
Wait, what does breathing have to do with it?
Think about it. When you breathe in, you're taking in oxygen, and when you breathe out, you're releasing carbon dioxide.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing this ties back to those cycles you mentioned.
You got it. Every breath you take is part of the carbon cycle. Plants take in that carbon dioxide you just breathed out and use it during photosynthesis to create sugars, which, as we talked about, is how they store energy from the sun. And as a byproduct, they release oxygen back into the atmosphere.
So it's like this amazing exchange between plants and animals. We give them carbon dioxide and they give us oxygen.
Exactly. It's a beautiful example of how interconnected everything is in nature. And it's not just about breathing either. Every time you eat, you're taking in these elements. And when you, well, get rid of waste, you're releasing them back into the environment.
So it's like we're part of this giant planet-sized recycling program.
In a way, yes. But these cycles, they're not just some abstract concept. They have real consequences for how ecosystems function. And when humans disrupt these cycles, it can have some pretty big impacts.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How do human actions affect these cycles, and why should we care?
Well, for starters, think about all the things we do that release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Burning fossil fuels for energy, deforestation, even just driving our cars. All of these activities are adding more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere than the natural carbon cycle can handle.
And that's a problem because...
Well, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, which
Mhm.
means it traps heat in the atmosphere. And when we have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it leads to climate change, which can disrupt weather patterns, melt glaciers, and cause sea levels to rise.
Okay, so disrupting the carbon cycle can have some pretty serious consequences. What about the other cycles, like nitrogen and phosphorus?
Well, those are being impacted by human activities too. Take nitrogen, for example. We
Okay.
use a lot of nitrogen-based fertilizers to help our crops grow, which seems like a good thing on the surface. But
But too much of a good thing can be a bad thing.
exactly. Excess nitrogen from fertilizers can run off into rivers and lakes and even seep into groundwater. And when there's too much nitrogen in these aquatic ecosystems, it can cause something called eutrophication.
Eutrophication, that sounds kind of scary. What is it?
It basically means too many nutrients. And when there's an excess of nutrients in a water body, it can lead to massive algal blooms.
Oh.
And while algae are essential to aquatic ecosystems, too much algae can block sunlight from reaching other aquatic plants, and when those plants die and decompose, it can use up all the oxygen in the water, creating what's known as a dead zone.
So basically it chokes out all the other life in the water.
Exactly. And these dead zones are a growing problem around the world, largely due to human activities.
Mm.
And then there's phosphorus. Remember how we talked about how it's a key ingredient in fertilizers?
Right, so I'm guessing excess phosphorus from fertilizers can also cause problems for aquatic ecosystems.
You got it. Just like nitrogen, too much phosphorus can lead to eutrophication and dead zones. It's all about balance, and when we disrupt these delicate cycles, it can have some pretty far-reaching consequences.
So we've talked a lot about these cycles and how human actions can throw them out of whack, but it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Like, what can I do? I'm just one person.
I hear you. It's a lot to take in, but the good news is that even small changes in our own lives can have a positive impact.
Okay, I'm listening. What kind of changes are we talking?
Well, one of the most impactful things we can do is to rethink our relationship with food waste, for instance. Did you know that roughly 1/3 of all food produced globally ends up in landfills?
1/3. That's insane.
It is. And when food decomposes in landfills, it releases methane, which is an even more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
So less food in landfills means less methane in the atmosphere?
Exactly. And composting is a great way to reduce food waste. It's like closing the loop on nutrient cycles, turning food scraps into valuable fertilizer for your garden.
So I'm basically a nutrient recycler. I like the sound of that.
You are. And it's not just about what we're throwing away, it's about what we're consuming in the first place. Choosing plant-based meals more often, for example, can make a big difference.
Because it takes a lot less energy and resources to produce plant-based foods compared to animal products, right?
Exactly. Remember that 10% rule we talked about? Well, when we eat lower on the food chain by choosing more plants, we're tapping into a much more efficient use of energy and resources.
It's like choosing the energy-saving option for our planet.
Exactly. And supporting sustainable agriculture is another big one. Look for locally grown produce, choose organic options whenever possible, and consider joining a community garden. It's a great way to connect with your food and learn more about where it comes from.
And these might seem like small actions, but they all add up, right?
They absolutely do. And don't underestimate the power of simply staying informed. The more you understand about these issues, the more empowered you are to make conscious choices that align with a more sustainable future.
So true. Knowledge really is power, especially when it comes to protecting our planet.
Absolutely. And it's not about being perfect. We're all learning and making adjustments as we go. The important thing is that we're all in this together. And every effort we make, no matter how small, makes a difference.
Well said. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. We've gone from the tiniest bacteria to global cycles, and it's clear that we're not just passive bystanders in this incredible web of life, we're active participants.
And as we've learned, our choices have the power to shape the future of these ecosystems, for better or for worse.
So to our listeners out there, I hope you'll join us in taking action. Let's make choices that support a healthier, more vibrant planet for generations to come.
Absolutely. And remember, every little bit helps.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the amazing world of ecosystems. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.